Hello, friends, and welcome to another episode of Being a Lab. Today we have a guest, and we're going to talk to her with her in a moment. But before we do that, I really want to thank you for all the support throughout this third episode, this third season. Sorry, I feel like this is a new beginning for us in many ways because we now have guests, and we thank you for your support, for your comments, and your questions. We take all those very seriously, and we are working hard to respond and get to you. So thank you so much for that. Another one thing that I wanted to mention is how important it is for us when you're giving us your 5 stars on Spotify. It really helps the podcast grow. And also when you subscribe and share. Honestly, that's fantastic. I thank you from the bottom of my heart as we record this. I'm thinking, wow, we are getting to know you, and we feel like we're growing. So thank you, thank you, thank you for that. We're very grateful for that. In any case, let's begin the episode. Today's episode, the title we chose was Authenticity, the Magic Key That Opens Any Door with Carly Clarck. Welcome, Carly.
Hi, Gonzalo. Thank you so much for having me on this show. I am a listener of the show, and I'm honored to talk about this topic of authenticity. And I just have to say, the reason that we know each other is because I heard you on a podcast, and I was like, this human is amazing. I don't know why, but I just need to reach out and connect with you. And you were so authentic in our initial connection. And this is like a full circle moment. So I'm really honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome, and that is so kind. I really appreciate it. That's true. That's how we met, through an episode of a podcast, and I'm so glad you reached out. I'm very grateful for that. Why don't you introduce yourself so our audience can learn from you and about you?
Sure. So my name is Carly Clarck Zimmer. And let's see. I think the best way to kind of showcase who I am is a shy introvert who also had this deep desire to be seen in the world.
Mm,
And I feel like that relates with so many of the people that I talk to and work with because we're like these walking paradoxes of like there's one part of ourself, but then there's this deep yearning and desire that also wants to come forward. And that has been my path. And it's also led me into the work that I do as a life and leadership coach to help that emerge from other people, that like self leadership. And so I've been at it for 8 or 9 years now in the coaching field and in the space and really blending the science-backed strategies and tools that are so powerful in the coaching space with the mystical, the spiritual, the energetic realm that maybe doesn't have a whole lot of explanation. And
true.
for me, it's really dancing between these two worlds. And that's my sweet spot. And that's where I love to work with people who they typically come to me when they value logic and their logical mind is making a lot of the decisions, but their heart is also like, there's this other thing, and I don't know why, and it doesn't make sense. And so it's really helping them blend those two sometimes paradoxical desires and finding a way to live in fulfillment uh,
Mm.
with their choices that they're making, which to me is authenticity.
That's fantastic. What a beautiful way to put it. I can clearly see that with my clients as well when they have this um, almost a challenge to make amends with both paths or both roads, to recognize that yes, there's the intuition or the more spiritual, but there's also reason and logic. And how do we help them to blend them and acknowledge them? I think it's a powerful thing to do. That's really really beautiful. So tell us about your work as a coach and how authenticity, it's a key uh, piece of the puzzle. Tell us about how is that for you?
Yeah, well, it actually emerged as I was going back through some client notes and really looking at I pivoted my business about a year ago because I used to do a lot of business coaching, and it's like there's more, this isn't, I don't want to talk about funnels and Google Docs forever. Like there's something more that I want to talk about, which was what we were actually discussing behind the scenes, which is this piece of authenticity. And as I looked back at client notes, their number one value was authenticity.
Mhm.
And like light bulb moment. Okay, I need to start to speak to this. It's a word that everybody is using. I think it's a little bit overused, probably. But then I also just felt that resonance in the word of, okay, this is the gutsy act of like making decisions that feel aligned with your values and feel right for you, and sometimes go against what parents or society wants, and learning, like you were just speaking about, how to make peace with the sometimes contradictory desires. So really what led me to this work with authenticity is just what emerged behind the scenes when clients were like, oh, I want to build my business. And like the business stuff was really simple, actually. But this work of breaking through the mind static and the mind chatter and helping them step out of boxes and find that unique voice that is theirs, your title to this episode, right? That magic key that
Mhm.
unlocks the door. It was when we were doing that work, then their businesses started to flourish. So it was a clue to me that that was actually the most important piece. The business stuff is actually quite easy after you get deeply connected with what authenticity means to you, and then how to be in integrity with yourself and follow through on making those decisions that align with what authenticity means to
Yeah.
you, which is the hard part, right? It's like
Yeah.
I have this ideal and now it's time to actually make the decisions and feel in integrity with yourself. That I think that's where the coaching comes
Yeah.
in.
Yeah.
And when we get to tell our clients the truth, like, okay, you said this and this is what's happening.
Right.
So what do we need to shift here?
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. I, as I was listening to you, I was imagining how do we, how do you teach authenticity, or how do you help others connect with being out and authentic when we clearly live in a world where it feels like they tell us how to look,
Mm,
how to
no.
what music to listen to, what kind of clothing we should wear, what kind
Mhm.
of tattoos we should put if you have tattoos, or what next surgery is the most important, or the next injection, or the next medicine. It feels like all that is out there. Not
Mhm.
not that we necessarily follow those trends, but to be honest, a lot of people struggle with so many messages, and many of them are so contradictory, right? So how do you support your clients when they are in the turmoil of those multi-model messages?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm super curious how you do it too, but I'll start.
Yeah.
So I think the most important piece is for them to start to understand what is true for
Mm.
themselves. So, and I'll give our listeners here some really practical tips. So I want to encourage you to start to think about, who do you admire? Who do you look up to? Who inspires you? And then what are the qualities about that person? They can be a public figure, an actor, a character in a book. It could be someone you know in your community. So think about the person. And then what are those qualities that you admire in the person? And not always, but often there's a correlation between the two. Sometimes it's a latent quality in you that actually wants to come forward, and we start to look for patterns. So that's one of the first things that we do. Maybe it is courage, right? And they really, I'm thinking about a book that I just read,
Yeah.
and the one character really embodies this value of courage. And I'm like,
Mhm.
oh, I connect with that so much.
Mm.
And because of that, I'm reconnecting back to my value of courage and how I can embody that more. So that's one piece. And then we also take it this level deeper of bringing in the senses. So
Mm.
my background before I was a coach, I was in the healing arts. I was a massage therapist for years.
Mm.
And there's so much research now on how bringing in the different senses can really help you connect with making long-lasting changes through mental rehearsal and other mindset tools. So we look at colors. You were
Mm.
mentioning the color of my wall before we
Yes.
started recording. So what colors feel like they're the vibration that feels authentic to you? What clothing, what textures?
Mm.
How do you want to present yourself in a world in a way that feels authentic and not in a way that you should be showing up? Like my clients always say, "Oh, you always look so nice when you're on Zoom." And it has been a process of what's going to make me feel like I can show up and be the most full version of myself. And I bring in this element of lipstick that my grandmother always wore lipstick, no matter like even when she was in the hospital, she would put lipstick on.
Oh.
And that helps me bring in that element of
Mm.
my grandmother. It's like, no, I want to make sure that I'm showing up in a way that feels like I can fully just be present with my clients. And yeah, sometimes like a certain, like I'm wearing velvet today, and that makes me feel like my most authentic version. So we bring in those sensory qualities as well. And then you want to start to look at environment and what in your environment do you have control over? I know sometimes we don't always have control over our
Of
environments,
course.
but
Yes.
it's what are the elements and the pieces that you can take a healthy sense of control over and start to align them with what's going to help you show up in that way. And one last piece, and then I want to hear from you. Like I'm so
Mhm.
curious. Um, I was just talking with a client last week, and something that was getting in her way was opening up her phone and scrolling in the morning.
Mhm.
And what she was telling herself was, oh, these people are inspiring me. But really, what was happening was she wasn't giving herself any time to connect with her energy in the morning.
Mm.
And the day would get away, and then she never had time to meditate or journal or any of the practices that she's been wanting to do. And so we have to be careful too, where our mind is also kind of tricking us like, oh, I'm going to go look at the people I follow and get inspired by them. But is that actually happening? Or are you sabotaging in some way and you're not actually giving yourself space to connect
Yeah.
through a journaling practice or meditation or exercise or even just some breath work? So
Mm.
those are just a few of the many things, but I'd love to hear from you if that's okay, if I can ask you a question.
Of course. Yeah, no, and before I respond, I love the way you describe it. It sounds like a wonderful journey, and what a pleasure, what an honor to have someone to walk along with you as a client with a coach like you. That sounds lovely. I think it takes not only a lot of energy, but also um, talent and art. I think one of the
Mm,
things that we don't speak a lot when we are coaches, I don't know why, is that coaching is an art. It requires so many hats and flexibility and so many other things where our main goal is to serve our clients. And I just want to acknowledge that it comes across the work that you do as you were
mm.
describing, the tools and the things that you use to bring them back to their authentic self. So thank you for doing that. I think when we work, even though we're not a team, but when we work as human beings towards the authenticity of other people, we're working together, right, to
Yes.
create a better world.
And you're so right. It is an art. And I think that also speaks to the human spirit. It's like we're
Yes.
not just these
Mm.
cogs that are meant to produce all of the time. And
Exactly.
that's probably the number one barrier
Mhm.
that people come to work with me is they're like, I need to produce in order to feel worthy of, being a human.
Yes.
And so it's breaking out of that cycle of productivity that can be very harmful for our mind, our body, our spirit, our relationships, and connecting back in with this creativity, this like
Hmm.
artistic side. And so it coaching really is that art. It is like a little bit science and a little bit art at the same time. And I think it speaks to just the complexity of being a human being.
Yes, yes. I want to go back to something you said in a moment. Let me answer. You ask, well, how do you do it? How do you work with that part? I think it's very similar to what you said. And what I've noticed is that I think what works best for me, this is not a recipe, but it has worked really well for me in the past, is to show my client their culture. And that's
Mm,
one of the most difficult things to see. It's
mhm,
really easy to be someone else's culture. It's like, oh, of course, he's from Venezuela or from Mexico or from Ireland or from the US. It's really easy for everyone to see our culture. But for us to see it, it takes a second person, another set of eyes. And why is it so critical to show our culture? Because sometimes we don't know that we're not authentic because we bought the idea of our culture. And I'll give you an example. So a quarter of my life I grew up in Mexico City, and the expectation I think throughout Mexico is that you have to eat hot stuff, like hot spicy, really spicy
mhm.
food. You have to be good at dancing, right? You have to watch sports on TV, particularly soccer, right? You have to be happy and joyful and super extrovert. And I am none of those things. I don't eat spicy food. I don't dance. I don't watch sports on TV. Much more less soccer. I couldn't care less. But that doesn't make me not Mexican. It's
Mhm.
just my authentic self does not resonate with that. Oh, and the most important ingredient, it is very expected that if you're a Mexican person, if you want to have a good time, you have to drink alcohol.
Mhm.
And alcohol is not good for me. I don't like it. I don't drink it. And so I was like an alien in a country where all the things that I don't resonate with that I felt like weren't making me authentic, I had to do those.
Wow,
I felt like I had to fit.
it's such a powerful reflection for somebody. I'm just imagining your clients as well to be witnessed and to be seen
Yeah,
that you're still who you are, even if you don't subscribe to everything that your culture is
yeah,
saying that makes you who you are. And what it sounds like to me is that also gives them permission to follow their path and with your support, taking those steps
yeah,
to actually embody and celebrate that.
yeah. And to respect the culture because it's not a anything there has nothing to do with being against that culture. It's just recognizing that maybe that is not allowing us to be who we truly are. And when we take those layers off or out, we push them out. It's like, okay, wait a second. It is okay to be this way, to feel this way, to connect this way, to have this other habits. It doesn't make me less of a quintessential Mexican or American, whatever you are. It doesn't. Now, and this is where it gets really tricky and interesting. This can be easily translated into an organization.
Hmm.
Leaders go through this all the time, right? When we even have the expression, well, you already drank the Kool-Aid. You had the Kool-Aid and now you can't see beyond. And so this same tool I bring to organizations, and I think it works really well along with many things that you've mentioned, but just to give you an example, I think it could be an interesting exploration for people.
Yeah, and I love bringing it back into the workplace. And even if you have your own business or if you're working in an organization, because this is also the piece where people come to typically work with us, right? Where they're like, my client the other day was like, I just found myself, we've worked so much on these boundaries and advocating for myself and speaking up. And then I get into this certain boardroom and I just lose myself and I just abandon everything that I value. And so over time, we've been able to work on that. But I think it's very common for that to show up for people. It's like, yeah, we'll do all this work and it'll be amazing. We'll do all this journaling and get connected with our authenticity. But then the reason coaching is so important is because when the rubber meets the road, it's like, okay, how are you showing up to
Yeah.
that conversation with your team, with your boss, when something is going against your value, your one of your values? Do you have the language and the internal capacity to speak to that?
Hmm.
And that's the deeper layers of our work
Yes.
um, that really makes for this key to be unlocked. It's when you cultivate that courage and you know what authenticity means for you, and then you have that capacity, which takes time, if I'm being honest, to really develop. That's why we kind of start with the sensory stuff and and then we have to take it deeper in order to bring it out into the world. It's looking at boundaries, looking at capacity. Energy is a big,
Hmm.
like recognizing what's your energy, what's other people's energy. When you're feeling like you want to speak and say something, but you're holding back, and just
Hmm.
recognizing those authentic actions that you can take in those moments, baby step at a time. And each time you do that, you're expanding your capacity to show up no matter where you are.
Yeah.
But it does take time to build that trust and safety within yourself. And I just want to say, like, there's nothing wrong with you because it takes time. Like, that's part of our natural physiology of being human. Like, and that's one of the things that I also teach is like, there's nothing wrong with you. Like, your brain and your body are doing exactly what they're supposed to do.
Yes.
And then we also have this beautiful, you know, other mystical side that craves freedom and doing something different and being seen. And yeah,
Yeah,
fascinating.
absolutely. Yeah. A few moments ago, I told you that I wanted to go back to something that you've shared, which is what's the number one reason why people hire you as a coach?
Mm, let's see. I think they feel something deep in their heart and they're ready to have that door opened. And it's usually an inner knowing of like something, there's been something here. It's not going away. I know it wants to come forward. It keeps knocking, and I'm ready to open that door. And then they logically talk about, okay, I want to get the promotion and I want to
Mm,
build my business and all. But really, at the core, it's that piece. It's
yeah.
there's something in me that needs to be unleashed. It's asking to
Mm,
come forward, and I don't want to live my life not allowing that and not giving myself a chance for that to come forward.
yes. Yeah. Yeah. I 100% resonate with what you've said. I think there's a yearning
Mm,
that they're able to finally name with
yeah.
first and last name. And that's when they choose to reach out and say, this isn't working, or there's a shift needed. Although many times in my experience, they don't articulate it this way. They don't come and say, something needs to shift. My job is not the ideal job. They're not going to say that, and it's okay. But I think after a little while, I love it how our clients discover that humans, we are full of contradictions, and part of that helps us realize, oh, this may not be the path. May not be the best way to blossom and to be authentic. So I was really curious. um and
Yeah,
so
and
yeah, go
can I
ahead.
just give the listeners like a little more contextual, like what it feels like
Yeah,
when that wants to come
please.
forward? Because it's like, this is how I've heard it described, and I felt this myself too. It's like when you are having a conversation, and then afterward, you're like, oh, why didn't I say that? Oh, I can't believe I didn't,
Mm,
respond in this way. And you start to like, that happens over and over again, or you're holding yourself back. Like there's something that you want to say, but your throat starts to close and your face gets hot and you just
mm,
start to feel a little bit itchy. Those are all signs, like in the physical body, that something is asking to be shifted. And that's typically when people are trying to find like the logical like, okay, why would I hire this coach? And what would make my ROI worth it? And like they're trying to logically convince themselves, but it's the feeling when that feeling starts to be like super annoying, I think. When someone's like, oh, I'm just like so tired of feeling this way. That's a cue that you want to be looking for a coach because there's something that wants to come forward and something that wants to be shifted. And you might not even know what that is logically.
mhm.
And hey, I just want to say to the listeners, like, it's okay for you to hire someone to help you start to find your own pathway forward with
Yeah.
authenticity as the guide.
Thank you. I really like that visual almost path for people internally. They can now sense, okay, if I'm going through this, it might be a good idea to reach out. So I'm happy that you did that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Yeah. What else? What else can you tell us about in your experience? What what can people expect? Say they decided to, yes, be more authentic and they started this journey and they recognize the shift is needed. What are the challenges they're going to face, or what can they expect in your experience to achieve and to feel, oh, I feel now so authentic, so whole.
They can expect this this dance between permission and discipline.
Oh.
So there is a bit of like, once you know your values and you know what you need to do in order to be in integrity with those values and be in integrity with yourself, there is a bit of like discipline that comes in of
Mm,
you showing up for yourself behind closed doors, behind the scenes when nobody's watching, right? How are you treating yourself? Are you following through with what you say you're going to do? And most of my people have impeccable integrity with other people,
mm,
and we have to work a lot on the integrity with themselves because they're always putting other people and projects before their own self-care, their passions. So that's where the discipline comes in. Of like, okay, you said you want to do this. We're going to work to help you get congruent with that integrity, personal integrity. And then there's also permission on the other side. And that permission side is allowing yourself to step out of those patterns of, okay, I can't take a nap unless I've done all of these things on my to-do list.
mm,
Or I can't allow myself to go for a walk because I have inbox zero, right? I have to get my inbox to zero. And so it is a bit of a dance between this discipline and this permission. And that's, again, this is like the infinity symbol, but I feel like that's a lot of the work that we do is learning how to be in those both worlds and finding that place that feels like it's fulfilling for you. Um,
mm.
and it's a challenge to
Yes.
to give yourself permission, but then also like just before we hopped on, I was talking with the client about, she gets to discipline herself so she doesn't stay up all night watching TV, so
Mm,
she can get up in the morning and actually have her time to do her morning practice, right? So
yeah.
it's that discipline, but then she also needs the permission to not feel like she has to be productive all day long, and she can actually take a break in the middle of the day.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
definitely a bit of a dance.
Yes, yes. Thank you for using the word discipline. It is a word that
Oh, I know people don't like it.
I adore. I actually like it. I do. Uh every time I've had an opportunity to share my distinction of discipline. I share it with clients, and I'll share it with you now. For me, discipline equals freedom. That's what it means. It
Mhm.
means that when you truly fulfill the promises you make, that frees up, just to mention a few, your calendar. You just, now you have time for yourself, right?
Mhm.
If you truly finish reading the book, now you did it. You can move on to the next one, and so forth and on and on. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. I love the idea of discipline and following through on what we say we're going to do, or
Yeah,
create.
and for yourself, I think that's where it really comes into play because I
Yes.
think people are quite good at at the discipline of, okay, this is due on this day, or someone asked
Mhm.
me to be here, I'm going to make sure that I pick up the kids here. But it's that discipline of I'm gonna shut the next episode off before it starts automatically playing on Netflix and actually
Yes.
get myself to bed so
Right.
that I
That's
can
a
sleep
good
at
one.
night.
Yeah. Let me interject something that I've been thinking for a while about authenticity and being authentic, and learning to be authentic. I think that's something that we learn from my vantage point. The element of guilt. Guilt is an emotion. I am extremely passionate about emotions because they play a role that sometimes prevents us or helps us do and be who we
Mhm.
are. And so, in my experience, and I'd love to hear, how do you tackle this one? Guilt plays a huge role in being authentic, to the tune of clients saying, well, I would love to be authentic, but that would require for me to go to the gym every day. And I feel so guilty. I have so many chores. Or, yes, I would love to be authentic, but I had to swap jobs and I feel so guilty. I have a family. I can't afford to say to everyone, we're moving to the Midwest, just to give you a few examples. So, how do you dance or manage that emotion with your clients when they, if they share that about guilt? I don't know if you've
Yeah.
heard.
Yes, they've definitely,
Mhm.
I think guilt is such a palpable emotion and it's really prevalent in our society.
Mhm.
But the biggest thing that we work on is number one, recognizing the emotion,
Mhm.
two,
Yes.
feeling the emotion. So a lot of the work is emotions are like tunnels, right? And if we don't feel them, then they pile up and they pile up and they pile up. And that's when, things become really overwhelming and we start to feel anxiety. So we do a lot of work on moving through the emotional tunnel of whatever emotion you're feeling. So if it's guilt, recognizing how that feels in your body. Is that actually you're feeling? Like where are you noticing it? And often it's in the mind when people locate where they're
Yeah.
feeling guilt. And then it's using some mindset tools of, well, do you actually believe that in your core that this is guilty? Or are these like societal beliefs or your parents' beliefs? Like, where did this come from? And a question that's been really helpful is who's benefiting from that thought? Who's benefiting?
Yeah.
Is it your work? Is it your mother? Is it your government, right? Like, who is actually benefiting from that thought? And that can help to unlock some of the invisible boxes that we put around ourselves. Like, oh, I can't do that. Oh, I'm going to let them down. I'll feel guilty if I don't show up for my kids or if I want to build my business, but I also have my kids. Like, how do I do that, right? And so that question of who's benefiting from this thought? Is it you or is it maybe it's your family? Like maybe there's some truth to that, but oftentimes it's like a societal paradigm
Yeah.
that is benefiting, right, to keep the oppressive systems
Mhm.
working.
Yeah. That's a great distinction. Thank you. I'm sure that our listeners are really benefiting from that when we are able to distinguish where does that voice come from? Is it many times it's not even ours? You
Mhm.
know, many times I discover, wait a second, that's my grandma, or that's my a boss that I had on my first job, and it's not helping me or benefiting me at all. So I can get rid of it if I choose to, of course. I think also many of those voices are really important. For instance, the voice pay taxes, of course. I mean, yes, follow that. It's important. It's part of the rules of society. But other voices, they only diminish our authentic self. And I think it's really powerful to give our clients the tools to challenge it. I love it.
Do you have anything specific that you help people with when it comes to guilt?
Um, I think people have guilt and shame. They use it interchangeable and they're very different. And so what I always go to is work on your distinctions of your emotional distinctions. Given that there are more than 200 emotions, depending on our culture, we're going to have only two or three available that we truly know and identify and can pinpoint and understand the message. But when it comes to more mixed emotions or emotions that require for more conscious, like bodily, to be more bodily aware,
Mhm.
like shame and guilt. It's like, oh well, I'm guilty. No, I feel shame. Well, no, let's stop. And so once they have the distinction, they're like, oh, okay. It's like showing you this and you telling me it's red. By the way, I'm showing a blue marker. Yeah, it's red, and I can tell you this is blue, right? I can write with it, and you're gonna see it's blue. Oh, okay, now it's blue. Perfect. Now that we have that distinction, next time guilt or shame comes, you can identify it. But the most important thing is what's the message of the emotion? Once they
Mhm.
know why is the emotion there, what is it? What is it? What is the emotion sharing or messaging? Just like a text, you identify it like, okay, that's why I'm feeling it. And the way I explain it is guilt is an emotion that it's very private. It's on the inside. It's when we go against a value that we declared it's important in our lives, we feel guilty. And the classic example is we say, oh, to ourselves, I'm going to be on a diet between now and the holidays. I'm not going to eat chocolate. And you eat the chocolate in your room, right? And you
Mhm.
eat it and you feel so guilty because holy cow, I'm eating the chocolate that I said I was not going to do it. So you went against a promise or something that you said, but it's very private. And that's the critical part that people don't understand. So if you understand the guilt is something private that is reminding you that you did not fulfill a promise, they go like, oh, okay, that's why I felt guilty. Versus shame, when we feel shame is when we went against a societal value, something that is agreed upon the community. That's why a lot of people that get divorced feel really feel shameful because they feel like they did something to society. So in that case, the emotion is telling you you did something wrong against our society. That's the
Mhm.
message. So when we, once again, identify both and know the distinction between them, it's easy. It's easier, at least, to know, okay, is this public or is this private? And with that, in my experience, when we work with clients, they're like, no, this is extremely private. Okay, so what's the value that you broke? Or
Mhm.
what's the promise that you made to yourself that you broke? Versus what do you do? Do you steal money from your job or do you do something to the community? Yes, I did something bad to my company. Okay, that's why you're feeling shame. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I really love that distinction. And I can't remember who said it, or I would give them credit for it, but I heard it also described as guilt is I did something bad, and shame is I am bad.
Mm.
And that really stuck with me all these years because it helps to kind of differentiate where someone is in their journey also,
Yeah.
and we might need to unpack. But I love thinking about the emotion that's behind that as well. It's
Yeah.
really
Yeah. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to share. I wanted to hear if you are okay with that about what practical, I don't know if I'm going to call them steps or tools, can you give our audience to so they can start working on their authentic self? Are there any ideas that you could share with us, practical, that we can review? Although you've said many before, I know, but just for those who are listening and they're like, well, but wait a second, where do I start? How can
Mhm.
I do this by myself? Even, of course, call Carly, please reach out if you want to work with her
Yeah,
for
please
sure.
reach out. Like I'm always, I love voice memos. I think I sent you a voice memo on Instagram. That was how we met. So I love to communicate through them. But
Yeah.
you know what? I think if you're just starting out and maybe you're newer on the personal development journey, I think values is always like there's
Mm,
so many, you can just Google values exercise and find a list of values. But really spending some time with what I mentioned earlier, like who in your life
mm,
do you admire and what are those qualities that you admire about them? And then looking at a values list and starting to see where are there some
mm,
patterns.
right.
And then you can ask yourself, this is where you have to tell yourself the truth, which I know is hard, but asking yourself, okay, if I value lifelong learning, where am I showing up for that? Like what is a number from 1 to 5?
Mm,
Like how am I showing up to this value of lifelong learning? Um, and then you can there's no judgment in it. You're just starting to get a baseline of where the opportunities are for you to lean in to authenticity by starting to make some adjustments like, okay, I value lifelong learning, so I'm going to take a painting class on abstract art, right? And just start to explore that side. And maybe that also lines up with creativity, right? So you're making some different choices that are aligned with your values. And then through that, your authentic expression can start to come forward.
mm,
So I think a values exercise paired with who are the people you admire is a great starting point. And then I think to take it a level deeper, because I think you probably have some coaches and people in the in our field who listen to this.
yeah.
I think the next layer is the energetic piece. So it's really starting to recognize in your body what's your energy, what is other people's energy, what thoughts are helpful, what thoughts are not helpful, where do you feel them in your body, and just starting to play around and track what's
Yeah.
happening. And some people can do this quite naturally on their own, and other times that's where it's helpful to have someone
Mhm.
else to just reflect back. Oh, I saw that your posture just changed, or your
Mm,
body language just changed. What happened there? And so that's when we can really start to unpack, especially if you're empathic
yeah.
or sensitive. Like I tend to draw in a lot of the sensitive souls of the world, um, who have kind of been trained to like dampen that sensitivity, right? So I actually think it's a superpower. And often we're taught as kids that we're not allowed to be sensitive, right? So we kind of push that aside.
Right.
And this is like allowing that sensitivity to come in. And what's been really powerful for my
Mm,
clients is them honoring that sensitivity and
mm.
like reclaiming it, and then being able to notice, oh, so and so came into work and I immediately felt this energy and I knew it wasn't mine. And I was able
Oh,
to, instead of taking it home with them and having it just build and build and build. So the energetic piece is where things get really fun and
mm,
powerful.
I love it. I wish we have more time because
I could talk with you all day.
I
It's so fun.
I love this part of energy. I think it is not often that we hear not only coaches, but I think, our teachers or even parents talking about those things. I think it needs to be absolutely streamlined. It needs to be a regular conversation. It is real, right? That's who we are. That's
Mhm.
what food produces energy within us, and water, right? And so that's who we are. We're constituted by energy. And sometimes I feel like the word, it's seen as, oh, wishy-washy. We're going to talk about energy, but in truth, that's who we are. Just like a car that needs energy, like your phone. We're not talking about something way out there, but something real that makes us human. So I'm so glad you're bringing this to the forefront. I really appreciate it.
And you know what I've also found? For years, I didn't talk about it because I didn't want the stigma of being too
Mm-hmm.
woo. And then what was happening behind closed doors in my practice is like everyone was really wanting to talk about it and learn about energy and learn about how to like decipher what's happening in their
Yeah.
body. And so it's been fascinating over the past 8 years that this is actually something that's happening
Yeah.
for many people. And they're not talking about it because they're afraid of being pigeonholed into like
Mm-hmm.
too woo. And so part of my work with shifting my business over the past year was like, no, we can be logical and strategic and, go for the promotions or the career growth or whatever it is that you want.
Right.
And you can also develop your sensitivity and your creativity. So it's like blending the masculine and the feminine
Right.
energies and finding that healthy balance for you, whatever that looks
Mm,
like. So that's
absolutely.
a really fun insight that's come forward for me as far
Yeah.
as the work that I think people are ready for. Also, we could talk about this another time, but like I think the collective consciousness is like ready to do some of this work around the energetic fields as well.
Absolutely. I think so too. That's why I'm so eager to bring these conversations forward, and I love that you're voicing it this way. I really appreciate it. It is easy to digest it this way, and I thank you for that. In closing our episode, I was wondering if you like to share with our audience, where can they reach out? Final words, please. Any information that you like to share that you want them to for them to connect with you, and any final words too, please go ahead.
Sure. Thank you so much for the invitation to share. Mainly I'm on Instagram, so it's at Carly Clark Zimmer, and send me a message if you're curious or what landed for you on the podcast. I would love to know. I love connection is one of my values, so like I just like to meet other humans who are interested in this work. And I would be honored to hear from everyone. And I'm so honored to have this conversation with you today.
Mm,
But if there was one takeaway that landed with you, listener, I would love to know what that is.
wonderful, really powerful. Thank you, Carly, for the time, the energy that implies to be here, what it takes. I know that, getting ready and whatever you did to be here, I'm very grateful. And thank you also, listener, for spending time with us in conversation. Please reach out to Carly. Let us know what you thought about this episode. And as always, please share, like, follow. You can also find us on YouTube. We have a version with audio and video, as well as on Spotify. And we'll look forward to hear from you next time. So thank you very much.